Have you ever had a money or career question you really wanted to ask, but didn't know who to go to or just felt uncomfortable even bringing it up? You're not alone. Talking about money can feel intimidating, even scary. And that's exactly what I'm trying to change. That's why I created a free virtual coffee chat, a casual, no pressure 20-minute conversation where you can bring one thing you're wrestling with and we'll talk it through. No judgment, no jargon, no sales pitch, just clarity, ease, and a real answer from someone who gets it. If you've got something on your mind, don't sit in the confusion. Book a spot at limitfreelife.com and let's sip and sort it out. Hey there, and welcome to Money and You. I'm Michelle Perkins, your host. My search for more fulfilling work led me to career and business coaching, where I stumbled upon a game-changing discovery. Money issues often start with our mindset and habits. You see, our relationship with money is the key to overcoming those frustrating financial obstacles. As an entrepreneur, coach, and problem solver, I'm passionate about helping you create a great relationship with money. Because, turns out, that's the foundation for a limit-free life. Each week on Money and You, I speak with amazing guests about all things money, mindset, practical tips, and everything in between. We're here to give you new insights, education, and empowerment so money can be one of your favorite relationships. So join us for some lively conversations and let's transform your financial life together. Welcome to the Money and You Show. I'm so excited about today's episode. I have a really, really fun and interesting guest, and you, from that, you won't probably be able to guess his specialty, but I'm going to tell you he is one of the most entertaining guests I've talked to, and he's also an expert in bankruptcy. Not really a very fun-sounding topic that one would find comedy in, but our guest today, Barry Levine, does. And so I'm going to just bring him right on. And, I don't know about you, but if you've had, and I know a lot of people have had this, where they just feel up against a wall, don't know what to do with the bills or the business problems or, whatever is affecting their financial life at particular points in life. And there's a part of many people's brain that goes straight to there's no alternative. I'm going to have to file bankruptcy. Is that true? I don't know. Our minds tell us a lot of untruths. So I'm going to bring Barry on to really dispel a lot of myths and to put a bit of a positive light on this, should it happen to you, and also with all kinds of tips on how to just, deal with this if this is an aspect of your life at any point. So stay with us. I'm going to give you a little background on Barry, and then I'll bring him right on. So, okay, the calls come late. Someone has ignored letters from the IRS, missed too many loan payments, or watched their small business slowly bleed out. They don't open with legal questions. They ask if there's any way out. For almost 45 years, Barry Levine has answered that question with calm, practical guidance. A Massachusetts-based bankruptcy attorney, he works with individuals and small business owners navigating serious financial strain, people who are scared, out of options, and unsure what the next step even looks like. His work isn't about judgment or quick fixes. It's about helping people understand what tools are available, how the system works, and what choices they can still make. What Barry sees again and again is that fear, not just debt, is what traps people. The legal process has structure, options, and predictable outcomes. What derails most clients is the panic that keeps them frozen in place. Barry's role is to bring order to the chaos. With each case, he applies decades of legal experience to help clients understand what's happening, what's possible, and how to move forward with a strategy that restores both stability and control. He first started practicing bankruptcy law in a hands-on Boston office while still in law school, learning case by case how to navigate both paperwork and people. That early experience still shapes his work today, detail-oriented, outcome-focused, and human above all. As a podcast guest, Barry likes to speak plainly about what financial collapse actually involves, what protections exist, and how people can move forward. So, Barry, welcome, and I can't wait to get into this conversation.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. I love to hear such nice things about myself. They should only know. But the one thing you hit upon, I try to get across to people is bankruptcy isn't the end of the world. It's actually, well, they talk about fresh starts, but very often it is a new beginning for people.
Yeah, and that was something that I found to be a really fascinating and refreshing mindset shift. And that's this show is about all things money, but I always like to include mindset and ideas about your relationship with money. Because as you said in the bio, it's the fear that is really more destructive than the actual thing happening to you out there. And it's all this. I mean, bankruptcy has just it does feel like an ending. It has a lot of connotations to it, and it's been built up into this, kind of, last resort action that's going to take you out for years and years. So,
Well, the problem, I have to say I do my own podcasts every once in a while, and somebody saw one of them and he called me to retain me. And he said what he found very refreshing was when I tell people it's only about money. You know, thank God it's not your health. It's not this, that, and the other thing. It's only money. And the credit card companies and the banks and they'll all survive. And I find that, people very often, they don't really realize that when they're spending all their money paying their credit cards, they're an indentured servant. And slavery went out in the Civil War. And, you're working for your creditors. And to me, it's more important to put food on the table, gas in the car, pay the rent than, $25 to Bank of America that you may pay off in 1,000 years. It's
so
crazy.
yeah. So where are you going with that? What are you?
Well, the thing is, you have to, one, what often happens is people decide to become proactive after the fact. Especially you mention entrepreneurs. If you're somebody that's going to be in business, entrepreneurs, this idea is great, and it goes out of business a year later. It's best to try to look at yourself and make yourself judgment proof, to make sure that if the shit hits the fan, you have nothing to lose. And, it's like, the person who comes into my office, like you mentioned, they have a foreclosure today at 4 o'clock. That doesn't happen. Everything creditor wise, debts, nothing happens, who knows tomorrow in America. But as of now, everything you have notice, you have disclosure, nothing happens in a vacuum. And, if you think about, you look at your assets, you look at your liabilities, and, to start off, you should see what you have at risk when you're out there. But granted, that's the perfect world. Most people, they're overcome by it. When I tell people I had a lot more hair back in 1980 when I started doing this stuff. People were games players. They could go to a department store and charge up this and do that and go on trips and figure they'd go bankrupt and get out of it all. But, it's been almost 35, 40 years now that most of the people who file bankruptcy are either downsized, were making a very good living and now are making nothing, or have medical expenses that they have no insurance for. And what are you going to do? You have no choice. And granted, you have these come-ons, don't get me started on debt settlement companies, but if you're blind in your left eye and you're missing your right leg, we have a special program for you. It's all bullshit. None of that stuff exists. And when you get down to it, most people, unless you have like a Picasso or something that has intrinsic value, when you get down to filing a bankruptcy, most people are assetless cases. And in Massachusetts and most other places, if I file a bankruptcy today, 4 months from now, I'm going to get my discharge and life will go on. And the interesting thing about creditors nowadays is they look at a lot of these post-discharge debtors as good credit risks, because now they're making 40, 50 or more thousands of dollars a year, and they can't file a bankruptcy again for 8 years.
See,
So
no, I
what's
don't
the
think
risk?
anybody thinks about that. I mean, that's not really out there. So
Oh,
that's
you'd be
really,
surprised.
oh,
I've
really?
I've done bankruptcies 4 times, 5 times for people over the time I've been practicing.
Wow. And how do you see their lives kind of going when that happens?
They come back, they're, like I said, a lot of them are entrepreneurs. They had an idea that didn't work out, or they had a business that was just driving them a sugar, and they take a break. They file bankruptcy. Now they're working for themselves for a while, and then eventually they build up to something else.
Hmm.
Fails again, and I'm still around. But you'd be surprised.
I think that's a really interesting thing because I think a lot of business owners start pouring their personal money or, taking second mortgage out, things like that to kind of cover these things and
Well,
save themselves.
I have good stories for everything.
Okay, let's hear
I had they were in the plumbing business. No HVAC, but it's like the same thing.
it.
And there were three partners, two brothers and an older gentleman. And the two brothers came to visit me. They were having some problems. They hadn't been paying their withholding taxes, which, if you've ever got into that,
Hmm.
for a closely held business that's having financial difficulty, the money you withhold from employees is the best cash flow to dip into because nobody's standing there with a gun making sure you're paying it over to the government. I mean, that's just the way of nature of the business.
Yeah.
And they owed the IRS about 60, 70 grand in unpaid withholding liabilities. And I told them to file a Chapter 11 because in a Chapter 11, when you have tax liabilities, it's a very easy thing. You pay that, you give them a deposit, and you pay it out over 5 years, and the interest rate is prime plus 2.5.
Okay.
Not bad.
Yeah.
They spoke to their partner. He didn't like it. He decided to use the equity in his house to pay off the IRS. So
Yeah.
I've been doing this long enough that I knew they will be back. And they came back a year later. They had the same $60,000, $70,000 due to the IRS withholding. I gave them the same advice. They went back to now at this point, their partner was a schmuck as far as I was concerned, but he said no, he had equity in his house. He's going to use the equity to pay off the IRS. He paid off the IRS. And again, I put them in my calendar. Back then, I kept a lawyer's diary in my desk. Now, I don't know why I still buy it. But 6 months later, they came back. Now they owe the IRS 120 grand, and he didn't have any more equity in his house to pay them off.
Mm.
They had to file a Chapter 11. They lasted 30 days, and the business was gone.
Wow. Okay.
And, I always, I've done this long enough that I find myself telling people I told you so very often, because why would anybody listen to me? I've only been doing this for 45 years. What could I know?
So the advice would have been do this earlier rather than later.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. You don't want to, the tendency of especially small business owners is that they ignore the obvious. Again, another Chapter 11 story. In Chapter 11's, when you are operating as a debtor in possession, you have to file cash flow statements.
Hmm.
And back when this case was being heard, there was a judge out in Worcester, wonderful guy. But if you asked him to submit a brief, he took things under advisement. And when he retired, they brought a judge down from Maine to enter the opinions on all the cases that were still pending. So somebody tried to file what's called a motion for relief from stay. They were a secured creditor. They wanted their money. They hadn't been paid in years. The judge took it under advisement, and I go to meet the debtor, and the debtor, I look at his cash flows. They're going like this.
Hmm.
But business was wonderful because he didn't have to pay anybody.
Wow. Wow.
He didn't survive much longer either. But they live in a dream world very often. And unfortunately for me, I'm an inveterate cynic, and it's very difficult. You know, I think it's blood from a stone or water from a stone in the Bible. It just doesn't happen in real life.
Wow, that is really interesting to me. So when you get that feeling that, I'm just going to have to start gutting my personal, investments and that kind of thing, that's when you stop and ask
You
yourself,
you have to you have to make a decision that I'm not going to start putting all my personal money in it. It happens all too often. I
yeah.
mean, you see people keeping businesses alive that have no business being kept alive. But
Yeah, I've seen it too. And I haven't really talked about this, it's all about the wonderful things you can do to grow but nobody talks about, well, people do talk about it, but it's this idea that people are kind of delusional, I think, spans the whole, financial spectrum. I think business owners definitely do it because when you're a business owner, you and I are business owners actually, and you're kind of wrapped up in serving people and your purpose, and I mean, you've built this thing. It's like a
the
baby.
baby.
Yeah. And so you don't want to let it go. You want to do everything possible to help it thrive. But we do get blind to things. And, I think pretty much every business coach out there is going to talk about, people focusing on revenue and not profit and people not paying attention to their cash flow, which is exactly why these things occur.
Yeah.
And I also understand people get in a bind and the business isn't coming in, so you feel like you need to spend more to bring the business in, and it's definitely challenging. It can be, but I kind of love the idea of noticing, stopping, and really reworking what you're doing. And
Well, and that of course sometimes is easier said than done. But
yes,
the one thing I'm finding nowadays, just in general, and I don't know if you're finding it out in your neck of the woods, is the SBA was very nice to businesses during COVID. They were lending money to this one and lending money to that one, and especially with closely held businesses that I typically represent, the loan was good for a very short period of time.
yeah,
And now the loans are coming home to roost, and there's no way these small businesses can pay. I mean, they gave them loans based on revenues, which had nothing to do with anything.
right.
And what I'm doing a lot of is liquidating these small businesses, followed by the principals of the small businesses going bankrupt too, because they don't necessarily realize that the SBA can be discharged in a bankruptcy.
I wasn't sure about that either. So what can and can't be discharged in a bankruptcy? And
Well,
something just a follow up. When something is discharged, what does that even mean? It just goes away that day?
it's if again, I love to give examples. Somebody gets an IRS tax lien recorded against them. An IRS tax lien is good for 10 years. And even though, and I hope there are no revenue officers listening and don't change anybody's idea, but even though technology being what it is, the IRS, in order to have their tax lien survive 10 years, has to renew the tax lien before the expiration of the 10 years. Now, in Massachusetts, you can only do a tax lien search at the court. For obvious reasons, you can't do it online and all this stuff. When you did a tax lien search, and this was up until about 10, 15 years ago, they had a 386 computer with a dot matrix printer that printed the tax liens out. And so you would look up the tax liens, they never renew them. So if people have patience, I've had a number of clients actually outwait the 10 years, and much like a discharge in bankruptcy, the tax lien becomes of no consequence.
Wow, interesting.
And like I tell people, you'd be surprised at how quickly 10 years can pass.
Yeah.
But in a bankruptcy, it's the same thing. Unsecured debt can be discharged. Secured debt can be discharged to the extent that they try to sue you beyond the value of the collateral. Taxes under certain situations can be discharged, like income taxes. Rule of thumb is if they're more than 3 years from the date the tax return was filed. They're different provisos and stuff, but they can be discharged. Trust fund taxes, unpaid withholding, unpaid sales tax, meals tax, those cannot be discharged. Mm. And student loans, I've had recent success with student loans and getting them discharged. Years past, up until when they made them non-dischargeable, I think in '98. Since then I've told people, if you want to discharge student loans, walk in front of a bus. But recently, the feds have started to take a look at the good faith of the student loan borrower, how old the loans are. Did they graduate, and are they working in the degree field that they graduated in, and what their income is? And I've had two situations where student loans have been discharged, and I'm working on a third right now. So it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I really like that message that this isn't the end of the world. And, back to those business owners, do you find that they go through the bankruptcy and then restart their business? I mean, is that, separately, a whole new one?
Well, lots of times in Massachusetts, we do it. You can liquidate a business several ways. Closely held businesses, I generally don't file Chapter 7s because they're very intrusive. 341 meetings, preferences, and trustees in bankruptcy very often don't distinguish between the closely held corporation and the principal. Or, for instance, like I said, I got lots of stories. These people had their corporation and they lent money to the corporation. And in the 2 years they were in office equipment, in 2 years they accrued a lot of unpaid sales tax. Mm-hmm. And their accountant at the time said, you had lent a lot of money to the business. Don't take it out as income, payroll, take it out as loan repayments. So, and this was before they had come to me, their local retainer said, well, instead of filing a Chapter 11, which they would probably still be around today, he filed a Chapter 7, and they asked about preferential payments. And all those payments that their accountant told them was an ingenious thing to do were preferences. Mm-hmm. And when I got involved with the case, the trustee, who I happen to know quite well, said, Barry, do your clients have $96,000 to pay us? They wound up filing a Chapter 13, but, sometimes there is justice. They got an erroneous refund from the IRS of $42,000 that they were able to keep. America's a wonderful place.
Yeah. It's so wild. Can you do us a favor and just define the Chapters 7, 11, and 13 for us?
Sure. A Chapter 7 is a straight liquidation. I mean, basically, you file a Chapter 7, you list all your assets, you list all your liabilities, and you discharge your dischargeable liabilities. The odds are, and I can speak mostly for Massachusetts, in Massachusetts, we probably have one of the best homestead protections in the country, up to $1 million in equity. So most people go through bankruptcies, Chapter 7s, they keep their homes, they keep their cars. They really don't miss a beat.
Okay.
Chapter 13 is usually, it's called a wage earner plan, and there are two reasons that I find for Chapter 13s. One is because people are forced into it because of their income. As I don't know if your viewers know, when you file a bankruptcy, whether you can file a Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 is based on household income and household size. So, of course, I should know this off the top of my head, but, for instance, if you're a family of four, and you make over $172,000 a year, you have to file a Chapter 13 and go through the whole means test. The other reason people file Chapter 13s is people who have mortgage arrears. I've had some clients who have 2-year, 3-year Don't ask how many year mortgage arrears, and you can file a Chapter 13 and pay your arrears out over 5 years, provided you stay current with all your current expenses.
Wow.
Which
Okay.
again is easier said than done. I have a young gentleman who now he has $190,000 worth of arrears, and I'm trying to explain to him that this house that you have isn't worth $10,000 a month. But why listen to me?
How is that? That's interesting to me too. After going through everything in 2009, 10, whatever, that they are still have their house at all with that.
Well, and I don't know how it is in other states. In Massachusetts, it takes a very long time to foreclose.
Okay.
Generally, from them sending you a notice of default to them actually, some states, the courts are here, the land court is involved, but it's mostly pro forma. It's here usually a year and a half until they get around to foreclosing. It's
Wow.
not doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes, for whatever reasons, banks won't foreclose.
Okay. They just don't want to own a bunch
And
of houses.
people why and the other side of it is that if the homeowner is inclined to make payments and they have it arrears, the bank won't accept anything less than the payment in full of the arrears.
Okay. Okay.
You
Wow.
know,
Interesting.
and the last thing, Chapter 11s are usually for businesses, sole proprietors, people who are, the DBAs. Though you can be above the statutory limits for a Chapter 13 and be forced into a Chapter 11 as an individual,
Okay. Okay.
which is a little ridiculous because I have one now where they're treating my debtor as basically, they don't seem to realize she works a job 9 to 5. She's not running a business.
Interesting.
But,
Yeah.
they're from the government and they're here to help.
Wow. Okay. So I know we talked about, a little bit about bankruptcy not being an end, being a reset. And so, can you kind of give a few thoughts around that? Like, say you go through this and it's post
Well,
bankruptcy.
I tell you, the best example I can give, and I know she doesn't mind me talking about it because she tells clients all the time, is my assistant.
Okay.
I filed a bankruptcy for she and her husband, has to be about 10 years ago, maybe longer. They still have their house. Their credit scores are up in the 700s now, even higher,
Okay.
and they're not missing a beat. You don't, even though bankruptcy is a matter of public record, unless you're stupid enough to talk about it with your friends, nobody knows about it. In
Unless somebody's on a
Massachusetts,
podcast talking about it as well.
well, I don't mention any names, but
That's true. Yeah.
I can if, but it's something that in Massachusetts it appears in a paper called Bankers and Tradesmen. Who reads that? I haven't read it in 30 years. And then when they list the bankruptcy filing, it's 6 months after the bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So most well, it's like the same way if you're, let's say you're going to arrange for a wedding. Do you know that the wedding venue is in a Chapter 11 when you give them your deposit?
Yeah.
And when they go out of business and you don't have their wedding, that's the first time you find out. So who knows about it?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious about some of I know very little about this. I do have a lot of friends who've been through bankruptcies, and, the big stress post bankruptcy was not being able to get any credit, having a terrible credit score. Those are most of the things that seem to be troubling people that I know.
You'd be surprised that, like I said before, the credit card companies look at people as post-discharge. They make a decent living. They look at them a good credit risk. The other thing to do is, I suggest, which is easier said than done because I don't think they exist nowadays, is to try to develop a relationship with a small bank, maybe a credit union, that could look at you more as an individual than a FICO score. They can see, hey, I represented people, they did masonry work during COVID. Who wanted a mason in their house? They filed bankrupt. It had nothing to do with what they did with their money. It was just the business wasn't meant to be at the time. And then the other thing is there are collateralized credit cards, which if your
Yeah.
viewers, you can Google them and you put $1,000 or $500 into a CD or a bank account. They give you interest on it and they give you a credit card. You
Mhm.
make the payments, life is grand. They don't make the payments, they take your money.
Yeah.
The other thing, and it's an interesting process. Lots of people go through bankruptcies. They own homes, they own cars, they keep their houses, they keep their cars, they keep making the payments on the mortgages and making the payments on the cars.
Mhm.
There's a process when you file bankruptcy. It's called the reaffirmation of, this is one of the reasons I keep Kafka on my desk. It's called the reaffirmation of a debt. And what you're saying is that I'm agreeing that this mortgage debt is going to survive my bankruptcy.
Okay.
So if I would just go through a bankruptcy and do absolutely nothing, I have a mortgage on my house. I keep making the mortgage payments, and well, California's a non-recourse state, but Massachusetts isn't. So I could walk away from my house, they could foreclose, and they'd have no recourse against me because the debt was discharged. Follow what I'm saying? Even though I've been paying it for 8 years.
Okay. Okay.
A reaffirmation avoids that situation mostly for the bank. Because now, if you reaffirm the debt, which the court has to approve, it survives the discharge, and you can't tell the bank, see you later after 8 years. You'd still be on the hook if there was a deficiency. And how I found out about that was a client of mine, and when the computer businesses collapsed in the aughts, he
Mhm.
had a house that was completely underwater. He couldn't reaffirm the house. There would be no way. He wasn't working. He had no income.
Yeah. Okay.
10 years later, he calls me up. He'd been paying the mortgage for all 10 years, and he never reaffirmed it. But the mortgage rates had gone down, and he called up his bank and he said, listen, I'd like to reaffirm my mortgage. I've been paying it for 10 years. I have a good record. They said to him, well, you discharged the mortgage in your bankruptcy. He said, I've been paying you for 10 years. What do you mean I discharged? Technically, he did.
Mm. Interesting.
And and he wound up going to another bank, but I never realized I wound up, not to blow my own horn, I wound up drafting legislation in Massachusetts to
Oh.
at least, well, the legislature has better things to do than my statute, but to require creditors to at least report that payments were made. Here it made it seem like he hadn't made a payment for 10 years.
Mm. Mm. So interesting. So he was still in the house making the payments.
Living there, making the payments, but they wouldn't refinance it because, according to their credit report, he discharged the debt in bankruptcy. And you
Wow.
know what Michigas is? That's what Michigas is.
Barry, this is really making me want to stress the point that you need a good attorney. I mean, you can't necessarily rely on your tax accountant or whoever to advise you in this arena. And like many things, money, there are a lot of options and a lot of things to talk about. And we tend to limit ourselves by not having enough knowledge or speaking to the right person about what to do here. And somebody with a lot of experience like you, who clearly is passionate about this world, is just going to be able to think for you and
Well,
make.
no, you need somebody who, it's like, I don't, it's like when I have to, very rarely do I go into district court in Massachusetts. I'm like a foreigner. And it's the same thing in the bankruptcy court. There are people who are there all the time. We know the players. I know the trustees. You know what you can do, what you can't do. You have a sense of things, and it works an advantage for you. You don't want to be the guy that, he's doing your first bankruptcy after he did your first divorce. I mean, it's not necessarily good.
So yeah, and this is interesting too, the time we're in right now. Do you have any predictions on, you think there are going to be more bankruptcies?
I have been busier since January of 2024 than I have been in almost the prior 23 years. It has been
Wow.
insane.
Wow.
The phones are ringing nonstop. I mean, and I'm filing cases age-wise for the whole gamut, from kids in their early 20s who decades ago I would say maybe you want to think about something else, but
Yeah.
now get on with your life, to people in their 80s. And it's not something I should say, but when somebody's in their 80s, you'll probably die before they'll sue you. So why would you want to file a bankruptcy? But on the other hand, it's, bankruptcy for people is peace of mind. The best thing for my business is collection agencies,
What's-
because they make people think, lay people don't necessarily realize how the system is meant to be jerked around. There used to be a comedian. I don't know if well, maybe you remember when you used to travel in Europe. When I a long time ago went to Israel. If I needed money, my parents could send money to the American Express office in Israel,
right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, in Europe, in Paris. And what he used to do with his bills, he would forward them to the American Express offices around the world. And by the time they made a complete circle, they went back and he never dealt with his bills.
Wow.
But people, when creditors look to collect, the system is built to delay. Because first off, the creditor itself doesn't want to let the collect case go to a collection agency, because now if they're going to collect, they have to pay somebody, and they will nudge you. And people may have got those letters. If you dispute this amount, it's a credit card. There's nothing to dispute. Does
Okay.
it cost you to send a letter? I always send a letter. Now, when you dispute it, they then have to send you every invoice to prove the account. Now, after the creditor, you ignore them for months, they send it to a collection agency.
Yeah.
Collection agency, all they can do is nudge you some more, because they'll send you the same letter. And what do? You send the same answer. I dispute it. Now they have to go back to the creditor, get all the bills, and send them to you. Eventually, the collection agency will get fed up and they'll send it to a lawyer. And I just had a case now where they were hysterical because the creditor sued them in Utah. We
Oh.
live in Massachusetts. Who cares? So even if they sue you, the attorney will send you that letter again. If you dispute the balance, send us a notice in writing. You send it in writing. And now you're months down the road. And then, so now they sue you. I used to, because listen, in a perfect world, people file bankruptcy right away. But it's not a perfect world. It takes time. The jokes, you need money to file bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So it takes time. And, I used to do pro se answers for my clients so they could just defend the case to keep, but they eventually get tired because all the collection firms, they send demands for interrogatories and demands for this. But I only concern myself with the collection process is when they get a judgment and now they try to act on the judgment. Because like in Massachusetts, there's a process called supplementary process, which is like debtor's court.
Oh, okay.
If you don't show up and you get pulled over for speeding, they issue a capias for your arrest.
Sorry.
And to me, that is The worst, because now you're tooling down the Mass Pike and the state troopers pull you over. But that is so far down the road in litigation that if you're thinking of filing a bankruptcy, you'll have gotten your discharge before that'll happen.
Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting. So there's a lot of, I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say if you can, if you've got some debt and you can pay it, you should pay it. If you can't pay it, do you just use these delay tactics? Do you pay it as soon as you get? I mean, what's the best way to go if you're really in trouble here?
What you really have to decide is if you're going to file a bankruptcy or not.
Okay.
Once you've determined you're going to file a bankruptcy, paying minimum payments, at least in my opinion, is a waste of time. I mean, if you're an assetless case, it's not going to make a difference.
Hmm.
And I don't, again, getting back to what I think I said earlier, is it's more important to put food on the table and gas in the car and pay the rent.
Yeah.
And that's to me what it comes down to. If you find that, I've had people come to me after I pay off all my creditors, I have $20 a month left over. It's insane.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They don't give you, the thing, a creditor, you pay them on time. I have so many people, they pride themselves in paying them on time and paying them on time. You miss a payment, they up the interest rate to 28%. They don't give you a gold star.
Hmm.
Why bother?
Hmm.
Yeah, you have to, I've reached a point where at my age, credit score, who cares?
Well, I like the way, I mean, you're not, obviously, this is your livelihood, so this isn't a small thing to you,
Keeps
but
me off the street.
you're lightening it up for people, though, which I think is important. This is a very, very heavy, heavy thing to think about, and we think about it way too long from what I'm hearing from you. And, I really love that you said bankruptcy is peace of mind. I've never thought about that before. Bankruptcy to me was a huge, black mark on your life, so I think it's really important for people to hear this message.
No, it really, like I said, getting back to being an indentured servant. You don't want to live that way. You want to be able, listen, if you want to go out to dinner one night, you don't have to worry about paying Bank of America unless you're using their credit card, which, that's a story for another day.
Wow. Okay. Well, Barry, we are close to the end here. I'd love for you to just maybe mention, just summarize a couple of key things for people who
Sure.
actually, I'd love for you to give people a couple of key things to still avoid bankruptcy. No offense, but if there's a couple of lights flashing in your life, what can you do to just mitigate that potentially?
Right now, I happen to think it's very difficult because there's no way, that years ago, I mean, I remember credit card companies would call up clients and say, I see you have a line of credit with $10,000. Why don't you use that and pay us off?
Oh, okay.
But that doesn't exist. And for instance, people who have mortgage arrears, so they'll get refinancing, but the bank will say you have to cure the arrears before we'll give you the financing. Does nothing for them. So I think the only thing nowadays is best to plan ahead, to know where your exposure is, what the worst case scenario will look like if the shit hits the fan. And from that, you just have to pay attention. You have to set deadlines for yourself. You can't say I'm going to continue to throw money into the business. Eventually that runs out. The 401k isn't going to be there anymore, the IRA or the relatives. And the other thing, I didn't even mention that though, is that, if you have a small business, something to do is consider if you've used friends and family to borrow money for your business,
Yeah.
to consider making them creditors in the sense that why shouldn't they be like a bank? So now a good friend of yours has lent your business $100,000. You give them a security interest. So now if the shit hits the fan,
Mhm.
You could contemplate maybe a friendly foreclosure with them foreclosing on your business and selling it back to Newco. I know that's another subject altogether, but you see what I just thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the beauty of this is you can think up, some.
Because very often, people, because like I said, when people come to me and I'll say, well, you have this business, has anybody lent you any money? If we're at an insolvent point, the difficulty about putting mortgages on is there has to be collateral consideration given. And, for an insider, it's a year before filing. It's a preference, Bernie Madoff stuff. And for a non-insider, which is a friend, it's 90 days. So even if you would, if you do it when they lend you the money, that's fine, contemporaneous. But if you decide to make them secured after the fact, you have to wait another 90 days before they're perfected.
Okay. That's
Not that I've confused everybody.
Well, it's interesting because people for small business do borrow from friends and family.
Absolutely,
Planning a
absolutely,
little better
and
with that is really smart.
all too often they don't realize that their friends and family can be banks like anybody else, and why shouldn't they be?
Yeah. Wow. Super interesting. Okay. Well, there's one thing that's been bothering me this whole time is whether or not I pronounced your last name properly. Is it Levine or Levine?
Oh, don't say Levine. It's it's Levine.
Good. All right. I did it right then. Thank you. I don't know why that was bugging me. But yes. And do you work with people outside of Massachusetts? Can people?
I've occasionally consulted with people outside of Massachusetts, but I would look to get them local counsel because, while the things I discuss, there's nothing new under the sun. My uncle was talking about doing this stuff in 1940 when he was practicing law in New York. But, you're better off having somebody local who knows the ins and outs,
Yeah.
that I wouldn't know.
Okay. And so you have your own podcast. What is that called?
It's Bankruptcy Through the Looking Glass. It's the book I wrote about it, and you can find my podcasts on YouTube.
Okay, great. And then what about your book?
My book is on Amazon, Bankruptcy Through the Looking Glass, and you can, if there's some place you can download a free copy. I have no idea where, but
Maybe on your website?
that could be.
Too busy for that to know those things. And what is the book about exactly? Is it?
It's about the reality of bankruptcy. It's actually something people should read because because the thing is, the 341 meeting, the meeting of creditors. And when I tell clients that the anxiety of the 341 meeting is a hell of a lot worse than reality, they don't believe me. And then they come to the 341 meeting, and I'm basically dressed like this, or I'm wearing my T-shirt that says, I saw Jerry, and they want to know why I'm kibitzing with the trustee, and we're cracking jokes. And I know these guys, we tell stories. And oh, by the way, here are the questions we ask. And 5 minutes later, we're done. And they go, that's it? Yep.
Yeah.
The ritual sacrifice I tell them about later. We don't like to get into that right away.
This is so many things. Money are so much scarier in your mind than they are in real life. And I feel like you did a very good job today helping people see this around this very scary topic. So, not that it's something we are looking forward to or anything, but thank you for
My
dispelling
pleasure.
some of the myths and making it seem like a different kind of option for people and possibly a really good one for peace of mind.
To me, if you find yourself in that situation, it's the best way out because otherwise it's shoveling shit against the tide.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. We'll wrap on that. That's great. Well,
Take care, everybody.
I really appreciate your time. This was really great. And audience, thank you. Thank you for showing up for the Money and You show. We love it when you watch the show. You can listen to it on all the podcast platforms on the Limit Free Life YouTube channel. And please share it with a friend. I bet you know somebody who may even be contemplating bankruptcy right now. That would be great to forward this to them. Give them some resources. Let them know about Barry's book. And just keep this in your arsenal of financial knowledge so that you have a wide array of ideas around, your finances and your business And so you can feel a little more financially free just knowing more than you did. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.